Over the past several years, Turkish construction companies have been raising their profile in places like Africa, Central Asia and the Middle East, directly competing with Chinese firms in these markets. In 2023, contractors from Turkiye carried out projects worth nearly $30 billion across 135 countries. And an important part of that includes railway projects, with the latest one being in Slovenia. The Divaca-Koper Railway Project is considered the country's most strategic and important investment, which will be supervised by the EU. While it's worth over $1 billion, less than half of it will be drawn from Slovenian capital. The project, which is expected to be completed by the end of 2025 and open for service the following year, is one of many being carried out by Turkish construction firms around the globe, including in Ukraine, Tanzania and Saudi Arabia. Turkish companies are also jointly constructing railways and highways that will constitute the Zangezur Corridor, a transport route that will connect Azerbaijan to Turkiye through Nakhchivan without Armenian checkpoints. And for more on Turkish construction projects around the globe, joining me now from Bristol, UK, is Nick Kingsley. He is the executive editor at the Railway Gazette Group. And from Istanbul, Vehbi Baysan, he is an associate professor at Ibn Haldun University. A warm welcome to you both, and thanks for joining me on Straight Talk. So, Nick, how far have Turkish construction firms come when it comes to these infrastructure projects globally?
Well, certainly in the rail industry, we've seen a real growth in international participation in major projects by Turkish companies. And I think most of that is down to the fact that in the last 15 years, there's been vast investment in the Turkish domestic rail and metro market. And that has acted as a springboard to enable Turkish companies to get involved in projects outside the country.
So maybe Turkish contractors undertook 389 projects worth $27.4 billion in foreign countries in 2023. So how big is this compared to more established players, say, in Europe and Asia?
Well, it's certainly a growing market, and Turkey is really taking a big chunk of it, and it's growing, no doubt about it. But this is due to the fact that Turkish construction companies, starting in the 1970s and certainly 1980s and 1990s, gained a lot of experience, especially in North Africa, namely in Libya, but also the projects in the Gulf and as well as in Saudi Arabia. So this is a long tradition, and you can see that now our companies are global actors, global players, and they're doing their job good enough for the international market, with the international standards. So it is growing, and I'm sure next year it will be far bigger than the number mentioned.
So, Nick, what do you make of the €1 billion railway project, which is being carried out by a Turkish firm in Slovenia? I mean, how much strategic importance does it carry for this Central European country?
Well, I think it's a very significant project. I mean, obviously, looking around Europe, we're in around the world even, we're in a period of very strong investment in railways and in rail projects. But I think the second Contractors project that you refer to in Slovenia is very significant. And of course, the port of Koper is a key gateway for trade coming from Asia into Europe. And the railway itself, this second track, will alleviate some very steep gradients and limited capacity of the existing railway to the port of Koper. So I think it's very significant on a regional level for Central Europe and for Slovenia, yeah.
So, Vehbi, do Turkish companies offer any advantages compared to their competitors? I mean, how are Turkish firms perceived in Europe and other regions?
Well, what I can say about it is, because I know it personally, I used to be part of that trade in Libya many years ago, is their practicality and their ability or problem-solving ability at times of crisis, that they, as quick as possible, they produce and actually the project continues. I think that's a vital important. And what other important thing is the Turkish higher education invested a lot in the last 2 decades, especially in engineering, which is feeding and boosting the construction industry, not only building roads, bridges, etc., but also in terms of building locomotives and the trams and trains as well. So there's a large investment there.
So, Nick, how does Turkey's geographical proximity to Europe, the Middle East and Africa make it more preferable by countries which are seeking infrastructural projects?
Well, I think I can only speak from a rail perspective, and I take my fellow speakers' comments that Turkish firms have got a lot of experience in other industries, and I think that's probably a key factor in their emergence in rail engineering projects over the last decade and more. But I think the other advantage that Turkey has as a rail market is that the Turkish government has made strides over the last few years to ensure that Turkish rail investment complies with European standards, particularly around interoperability and the technical specifications that are needed for European railways. So Turkey, as we know, acts as a bridge between Europe and Asia. And I think it isn't that surprising that we're seeing Turkish firms using the skills to build railways in Turkey and then taking those skills to the international market, to Africa, to other parts of Europe. That isn't a surprise at all, and it's a clear trend.
So, VP, Turkey has intensified its diplomatic and economic involvement with Africa in the last 2 decades. So what's the reason behind this, and how active are Turkish firms in the continent?
Well, actually, it started, the expanding, first of all, the Turkish scholarships and many thousands of students now currently studying in Turkey. But along with that line, at the highest level, the presidential level in Turkey, many visits to the region, in fact, opened up a lot of opportunities for Turkey. But what is important here is that Africa is like a playground, an investment ground for China, for Europe, for US, but Turkey is also taking this part, and they're determined to enlarge and expand and deliver their expertise and know-how to the region. So that makes Turkey known in the region very much, and the services they're offering seems to be appreciated, and often Turkey is, as a result, mediating in conflict zones.
So, Nick, Turkey has been actively engaging in railway projects in Africa lately. So they were even able to scoop up some contracts once held by China. Why would some countries prefer to work with Turkiye, let's say, as opposed to China?
Well, I can't comment too much on the sort of geopolitics of it, but we have seen some challenges facing projects that have been led by Chinese investors in Africa and elsewhere in the world. The Chinese-backed railway through Laos is a very high-profile example, where perhaps some of those agreements that have been widely heralded when they were launched have proved to be more challenging as time has gone on, and I think perhaps some countries are now thinking, well, it's good to have options of going to contractors from different parts of the world. And clearly with examples like the Turkish contractors such as Yapi Makezi that are working on the standard gauge railway project in Tanzania, I think it is clear that in future projects in Africa will have more of a range of contracting companies, some from China, but also some from elsewhere in the world.
So, VP, how much potential could Turkey have in a place like Africa? Obviously, it is still behind the countries like the United States and China. But could Turkish construction firms become large players on the continent when it comes to building things like railways?
Well, it's certainly the policy or strategy of Turkish companies to have more and more international projects and be part of the globalization with the global standards. That's absolutely important. As I said, the higher education in Turkey feeding this, and also you can see that the Turkish government is also backing up these projects. So Turkish companies are not left alone. You can see that a lot going on behind the scenes so that the Turkish companies successfully obtain those projects, but also execute and finalize it in a desired standard. So I think it's a growing potential now in Africa for Turkish companies.
So, Nick, could global railway lines see a renewed interest when it comes to international trade and transport, given the geopolitical tensions we have seen on traditional shipping routes like the Red Sea?
Yes, absolutely. I think, the rail market, if we're looking at trends like, for example, the shift of global trade from China to Europe, a lot more of that traffic was carried by rail over the past 10 to 15 years. The rail market faces some challenges, of course, because some of those rail corridors pass through Russia, which is clearly problematic at the moment. But I think with the rise of the so-called middle trade corridor, which includes some short sea shipping routes like the route to Koper in Slovenia, we'll see more of a mix of freight traffic moving from Asia to Europe by rail, but also short sections of maritime traffic as well. So there will need to be rail investment to support these flows, and it's something that the Turkish government is very much aware of. And we know that obviously there have been critical projects like the tunnel under the Marmara Strait in Istanbul, for example, that primarily is a passenger rail link for Istanbul, but it also carries some rail freight. And in the future, there are plans for a freight bypass around Istanbul, which I think could be really significant in terms of driving container traffic to rail as it moves from Asia to Europe.
So, Nick, besides geographical tensions, how important is it to build railways in a bid to help stop the climate crisis getting worse?
Yeah, well, this is a trend that we are seeing all over the world, Aisha. I mean, I really can't stress that how much we are seeing a revival in rail investment, and certainly in countries that perhaps even 10 years ago we would not have thought would be spending money on rail and metro. And I think the example of a city like Istanbul, where there has been so much investment in the metro network to alleviate traffic congestion, I think that's a really interesting model for future investment in cities around the world, and particularly thinking of really high population cities like somewhere like Lagos in Nigeria or parts of Latin America, where metro and urban rail investment will be a key driver of mitigating traffic pollution in the years ahead.
All right, gentlemen, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.